I went public with my decision to have a prophylactic mastectomy in 2012. It was a really easy decision to make and a really difficult decision to live with. Now, my mother had died of ovarian cancer, and within weeks of her passing away, we got word that she had been tested positive for the BRCA1 gene, and um, the Cancer Association of Canada, whatever it's called, has sent me a letter asking if I would consider getting tested for the same gene mutation just to make sure for preventative measures. So I did. So I saw it as a get out of jail free card. I was kind of thinking at the time because I was just in the mourning process of losing my mother. She died on December 15th, I believe, 13th maybe. Of 2008. And I'd already been tattooing for about 12 or 13 years at that point. And I'd already been tattooing scar tissue, and I'd already been tattooing breast cancer survivors and starting to become a specialist in mastectomy tattooing when she was dying. That was one of the reasons I got into mastectomy tattooing, when she was diagnosed with breast cancer or ovarian cancer back in 2006. So she died in late 2008. And by about January 10th of 2009, my journey into cancer kind of started. Well, her cancer diagnosis and passing away was my journey into cancer. I was given an opportunity to skirt around it, like that get out of jail free card idea, by having a prophylactic mastectomy when I was tested positive for BRCA1, which leaves you with a up to 83, I think, percent chance of getting breast cancer, and like a 66% chance of getting ovarian cancer was the stats that I was given at the time. So anyways, like I was saying, I was invited to go on the news. A friend of mine, a client of mine, actually nominated me to share my story. And so the news called me, the local news in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, reached out to me and asked if I'd be willing to share my story. And since I was pretty fresh on everything, I was motivated. And they really played into the idea of like, if you can just help one person, if you can just help one person. So I decided to share it. And I was on the local news. And like I said, it was an easy decision to make, but a difficult decision to live with, because the thing that I didn't expect, I was hoping to get to the few people who might have really benefited from hearing my story, but I didn't even think about that all of a sudden everybody was going to hear my story, because not only did they run it on the primetime news that day, but they ran it on the morning news. They ran my story on the morning news the next morning, and then they ran it again the next evening or something like that. So all told, my story ran to about 1.3 million people 3 times in 2 days. And that became the part that was hard to live with, because everywhere I went, people were like, oh my God, I saw your story. I had no idea. And I had to learn pretty quickly that that must have been part of my life's calling, was to share my story. And so I had to get comfortable quick with finding words for my story and really kind of identifying the parts of it that I thought that people really might benefit from hearing, like how hard it was for me to make a decision to have a prophylactic mastectomy, and how much harder it was to live with that decision, especially because I had required a couple emergency surgeries, and I had some ongoing issues. And the initial surgery, and this is kind of why I wanted to share this story with you guys today. The initial surgery was like one thing, preparing for having a mastectomy, for having a breast amputation, which is really what it is. Feeling very grateful that I didn't have to also face any kind of cancer treatment, and the fact that I do not understand the trauma of a cancer diagnosis, and separating the two from having the mastectomy trauma, but really only being able to speak to mastectomy trauma. And then, of course, the tattoo journey, which I was excited to share because I already had so much experience in the tattoo world, and already had helped a lot of people reconnect with their bodies. And I was excited to use tattooing as a way to reconnect with my body. And I'm just speaking frankly here. Like, you can tell it's not rehearsed. I really like to be authentic and genuine with my words. So I shoot from the hip. And sometimes that means I misfire a little bit and I might go a little bit off topic. But it was the I was prepared for the original. Okay, so the mastectomy is this, and here's what your healing is going to be like. And there was a few things that I wasn't really informed about. One of them was wearing compression. So the doctors didn't do a good job of informing me about wearing compression. And then what happened was my first complication was I had went from mastectomy to tissue expander, and then the tissue expanders are placed under your pec muscle, between your pec muscle and your chest wall in the lining of your rib cage, which is very closely connected to the lining of your lungs, which is a bit of a danger zone. And I got really close to it. Because what happened was I didn't wear compression. And so they make an incision in your skin, and then they make an incision through that part of your pec muscle that's pretty close in the same spot. Of course, I wasn't awake for the surgery itself, so I don't remember very much about the surgery itself, just what was explained to me and what the experience of my body that I had after. So since I wasn't told to wear compression, that tissue expander, which they pump up every couple weeks with an extra like 50 to 100 cc's of fluid, so it expands and makes the pocket a little bit bigger than the implant to leave room for some inflammation when they swap out the tissue expander with the breast implant. So I've talked about this before. You guys might have heard this if you've heard any of my other videos. Excuse me. But what happened was, because I didn't have compression, was that tissue expander came out of the muscle incision, but stayed under the skin incision because I had tape and stuff over that incision. And it just kind of, because they separate all of your tissue almost as high as your collarbone to the back of your armpit, kind of like all of that tissue is breast tissue, and they separate the skin from it so that they can safely remove all the breast tissue and leave your skin intact. And so what happened was this tissue expander popped out of the chest incision and settled in over here to some of that skin that had been separated. Now, that wasn't traumatic. It's a complication. They prepare you for complications. They don't really tell you what can go wrong, so you don't anticipate all these things. And from the work that I've been doing with my own mastectomy tattoo clients over so many years, I learned that the complications are usually worse than they prepare you for. So I wasn't really prepared to be sent home from the hospital when I begged them to fix it. What they said at the hospital was, your surgeon's on vacation and you're just going to have to wait till he gets back. And so every day I went into the hospital, like, fix this, because I couldn't sleep the night before. It's building a huge seroma around the tissue expander itself, while all of this tissue that had just been separated is starting to heal and bond, as it does, because the body is magic, right? So while all this stuff is healing and bonding, and whatever scar tissue, internal scar tissue is happening, is starting to form, and the actual thing that's supposed to be under here is over here with all of this fluid and inflammation, and they said there's no infection present, so you're just going to have to try and stay comfortable until your doctor comes back in 2 weeks. And then I went home and I couldn't sleep, and so I went back the next day and I'm like, fix this, you have to fix this. And they wouldn't. So I had 2 weeks of turmoil every day trying to go to the hospital. I'm like, you have to fix this. You cannot send me home like this. I'm telling you, I'm so uncomfortable. Fix this. And I know that all of this tissue is bonding, and now they're going to have to separate it. So that was a little bit of an extra trauma that I wasn't really prepared for. And if any of you are listening who've had a mastectomy, please, you're the ones I'm talking to, because it's okay to be a little bit upset at the fact that it's harder than they prepare you for, and it's harder than it looks. And if you're tattoo artists and you're watching this, your clients have probably been through a lot more than they're letting on. So anyways, back to me being on the news. And so now I'm on the news and people are approaching me and they want me to talk about this. And what I'm not talking about was this complication that I had and trying to deal with, like, how hard that was. But what really sucked for me was that I just wanted my mom there with me. I never had siblings. I don't have first cousins. I was the only child and the only grandchild. I had a very small family unit. It was just my mom and her husband and her brother and his wife, and then my grandparents. So pretty small little family unit. And her brother died of cancer before she did. So I felt really lonely in the hospital. I felt like there was no one I could really reach out to. My boyfriend at the time was very unsupportive of this whole thing, maybe just a little bit immature, not really, just it just was by myself. I felt like I was pretty alone. So I'm in the hospital trying desperately to turn this into a positive, because that was my outlook going in. I'm like, I'm going to have this preventative mastectomy, and it's definitely not something I would have chosen for myself had I not been at the risk that I had been at. 83% chance of getting breast cancer is, that'll scare you into making a decision. And then I had gone public with that decision, and in order to hopefully empower other women with a BRCA diagnosis, 1 or 2 or whatever. There's so many different genetic mutations coming out now, that I just wanted to start the conversation of like, this is something that we need to talk about. This is a risk, women need to talk about this. I was 32 years old when I got that diagnosis, and I was 36 years old when I had my breast removed. I thought I was really prepared. Mentally, because I felt like 36 was old enough to be able to handle it really well mentally, and young enough to be able to handle it and heal really well physically. So I felt like it had kind of worked out really well, and I felt like it was divinely planned, and I felt like it was my calling. I really felt like this is my calling. I've already so knowledgeable about tattooing scars because I started tattooing scar tissue in about 1999, and nobody was around to teach you. I kind of had to learn by making mistakes, and learning the hard way is usually gives you a different kind of connection to the truth and the hard facts of how difficult tattooing scars can be, because it's fairly easy to make them worse if you don't really know what you're doing. And yeah, so anyways, back to my decision to go public with this. Now, that decision has been called upon a few more times since then. InStyle magazine called me in 2020, early 2021, and invited me to be a badass woman. I was like number 41 badass woman of 2021 or whatever. And when I asked the lady, like, how did you hear of me? Because she phoned me on my phone, and I don't usually have my phone number anywhere that the public can get a hold of me. So for this very reason. And so I said, like, how did you get my name? And she said, well, she was researching stuff about tattoos, and she was researching stuff about breast cancer, because she wanted to do a specific breast cancer and tattoo article. She just really wanted to write an article for October, for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And she said my name kept coming up on both ends. So she asked me if I would accept her nomination to be one of the badass women of 2021. So I said, yes, I will accept that. Because I feel like speaking about the tattoo side of things and the previvor side of things, this is my calling. Or I wouldn't have been in the situations that life has put me in, right? And this being one of them. So I was like, okay, I got to get ready to speak to this on a broader scale. And by then I had already been teaching areolas for about 7 years. I'd already worked with a lot of other tattoo artists and really learned a lot from all the different personalities that I was meeting, like all of that. I was excited to share what I had learned, because if I've been given a voice, then I better use it with as much grace and vulnerability and authenticity as possible. So she put me on, like I said, I was one of the badass women. And then she also did she did the breast cancer mastectomy tattoo interview with me for that October as well. So I was featured in InStyle magazine twice. So that was an honor, but there's been a couple other times, that I've been really called to speak on this at a different kind of level. I've been in Leap magazine. I've been featured in a bunch of podcasts, magazines, TV interviews, radio interviews, and I just had to roll with it. And I just wanted to say, every time I speak out about this, even right now, I'm nervous, I'm scared, I'm afraid of judgment, I'm afraid of what other people think about me because I've received a lot of negative judgment, most of it from within my own peer group. Other people that tattoo areolas have judged me the most negatively, which is a bit of a shock, but I'm rolling with it. And when it comes right down to it, I'm still going to keep this conversation going for the few people out there that are tattoo artists that really care about helping your clients and you want to understand things from their point of view, because I do represent the client. But also breast cancer survivors who maybe or previvors, even people who go through top surgery can relate to a lot of this stuff, because we don't know when we're choosing to have one of these surgeries, what's going to follow the surgery. So for me, I started feeling sick around 2017, and just I didn't understand like what was going on. I'm like, I have this intense fatigue and I'm always tired. And sometimes I just, go from like the bed to the couch and back to bed. And I'm like, why is this interrupting my life? Like it was really affecting my quality of life. And I didn't know what was going on. It didn't make any sense. Until I learned about breast implant illness in 2019 and decided to explant my breast implants when they were recalled for causing cancer. But breast implant illness was just starting to come to the forefront as a suite of 41 different symptoms, I think is what it was. But there's also like a number of known carcinogens in breast implants, and now they've been proven to cause cancer. So women are going through this too. Now they have a mastectomy to save their life, or as a preventative measure, like I did. The doctors call it risk management measures. So I took risk management measures with my 83% chance of getting breast cancer. And now women are having implants because they seem easy, and women with low body fat is kind of one of their only options because they can't use their own tissue to rebuild a breast mound. Where I was a little bit heavier set, so I could have done that, but I was afraid to be in 22 hours of surgery. Terrified me for other reasons that I might speak of from a previous surgery that I had necrosis on that I might start speaking of publicly. I'm not sure yet. Because it's hard for people to know this much intimate stuff about you. It's hard to face people's judgments about that, you know? And I have one of my friends' husbands said, "Who would cut off a perfectly good set of tits?" And I overheard him and walked into the room as he was saying that. He's like, it's just there's no room for judgments in this space. I will say that. So whatever judgments you have of the decisions that I have made, I don't care. Have them. But for other women, it having judgments about this kind of thing really does kind of stop other women from wanting to share their journey as well. So I would like to keep this conversation going so that other women feel safe to share where they're coming from, because it's such like there's such a big amount of this in our modern day, and it only seems to be growing and growing and growing. And I think they said a couple years ago, 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer. And I feel like that number is rising to 1 in 7 and 1 in 6. Like, I feel like this is such an important conversation to have, that I'm just not going to be silenced about it. And I'm going to continue to talk to survivors and previvors. And like I said, top surgery recipients will understand a lot of this stuff too. And tattoo artists, so that you can understand the other side of things and provide a higher level of trauma-informed client care to the people that you work with. I really just want to wrap up this little talk today with and thank you for staying this long. If you have, if you have, you probably haven't. With it's always a little harder than it seems. Oh yeah, I wanted to share the rest of my story about having my explant surgery and my explant journey. So I implanted to feel whole again, and I had areola tattoos done, and they didn't heal well. They were overworked. And then I had a big, beautiful tattoo done by my protege, and it was just a really beautiful experience. And then when I had my explant surgery done, they cut out a lot of that tattoo. And when I demanded proof that my implants weren't leaking, they gave me my implants back with those tattoos attached to them. And the trauma that came from opening up that bag and looking inside and seeing my tattoos attached, and they just gave them to me each in a Ziploc bag with the chunks of my tattoo that they cut out, which I felt was probably not the most ethical thing to do. And at the time, all I could do was laugh about it because it was so obscene. And I was already distraught at having my implants removed and my tattoos cut up, and the experience of having a deformed body and indents where I used to have breasts, and scars that were like it. I still can't put it to words. It's been like 6 years and I still can't put it into words. I didn't even make one post this year about Women's Day because I was still like, this womanly part of me, this actually, I'm glad I stayed on a little bit because this is really the nitty-gritty of what I woke up this morning. I meditated, and this was the message that I wanted to deliver, but I knew there was a little bit of backstory to get here, and I almost forgot because it's hard to talk about. And if you've lost your breasts, you understand. It's so hard to talk about these parts of it, right? So we just kind of laugh it off and brush it off like it's no big deal, but it is. It's such a big deal. Because it's our nurturing area. And if you've had breast cancer, there is nothing that you did to bring cancer into your life. Actually, you know what? This is a pretty long little podcast episode. Should I break it up into two or keep going? I think what I'll do is I'll keep going real quick here and I'll just kind of outline the next part. And then I'll do another follow-up podcast that really talks about the energetics of this, because that's kind of what I'm getting at. I'm rewriting my book, Healing Tattoos, that came out about 5 years ago. And I'm really grateful with how much that's influenced people in the tattoo world. Now they're all talking about being trauma informed. It's fantastic. So when I had my implants removed, I wasn't prepared I knew I was going to have some surgeries. There's some great flat groups on Facebook, a bunch of them, where women who have decided to go flat are just sharing their pictures and how they're dressing themselves and how they're finding new clothes and trying to find that piece of femininity in themselves again, even though not only are they flat chested, but those of us who have had implants, if the implants have caused our body any kind of trauma, which mine did, especially because of what was happening with that seroma here that I talked about. So this side of my scar was adhered to that lining of my rib cage, and like I said, that lining of the lung, which was really a scary spot. My surgeon was I had an emergency surgery later because there was blood. There was a vein that was nicked to avoid harming potentially the lining of my lung. And that was really where a lot of my trauma came from, was when I was rushed back in 10 days after my explant and just coming to terms with the fact that I had indents and deformation and that I wouldn't be able to be a candidate to get any kind of restorative surgery in the future. Then I flew over to Amsterdam and got stuck there when COVID lockdown happened. And I just took my tape off before I got on the plane. I had a shower before I flew and took my tape off in that shower, and I was not allowed to carry anything. And then I went to Amsterdam, and then they closed the borders for travel. So this all played into a lot of stored trauma in my body, and seeing my tattoos on those implants was really just, it didn't help. This is a more private side of things, but it opens us up to the conversation of the way that we hold and store energy in our body, especially given that this is the area that we nurture with. And if we've had children, which I have, and I don't have that experience, but if you've had children, this part of your body has not only been a part of your connection with your spouse and that feminine identity, but also a life-giving place of your body where you've nurtured this new life, this miracle of life. And we just have all of these different kind of relationships as we go from child to maiden to mother, and then moving into the crone era where your estrogen starts to reduce and you become the wise era of your life. You move into the wisdom, and your breasts create estrogen, and when you have them removed, that is a cutoff of estrogen. And just all of the ways that all these parts of us flow together and make us whole in who we are, and how experiencing a lack of that wholeness in this nurturing area really leads to being at odds with the idea of wholeness and the idea of being a woman, and what kind of steps really will fill that. Tattooing being one of those steps to reclaiming the body on your own terms and feeling whole again. And hopefully the tattoos go well. Mine didn't. Mine were a little bit overworked and they didn't heal well. They didn't really retain the pigment fully, and so created a whole new thing. And just giving survivors an opportunity to explore every facet of that, where maybe you had your mastectomy in the 80s, where implants were just starting to become a thing, and really there wasn't really a lot of surgical options available to you, that now 40 years later you might be looking back to that time and still trying to fill in those little holes. And that's why I feel like these conversations are important. And that's why we're going to keep having them. And the next conversation that I would like to have here is about how these traumas are stored in the fascia, and how the fascia connects with your chakras, and your heart chakra having fascia bands that it connects with here that most of us don't even consider before we go into surgery, but then it's affected. And then we have things going on in our body and in our energy field that we don't really understand. Just like I had when I started having symptoms of breast implant illness, I didn't understand why I had such heavy brain fog, which is also called chemo brain, right? A lot of my clients talk to me about chemo brain and the brain fog that comes from all the treatments and stuff that you have to go through after cancer, and what true wholeness really means. So if you're still here, thank you for being here this long, and stay tuned. If you're a tattoo artist, this will really help you, I hope, to understand some parts of it that might not make sense to you, so you can relate to your clients a little bit more. And if you're a survivor, previvor, top surgery recipient, comment below here. What do you think I'm right about or wrong about? What would you like to hear me talk more of or less of as we continue this conversation? If you have any questions about certain things that I might have been able to see both sides of the spectrum, and when it comes to tattooing, especially because I've spent lots of hours on both sides of that needle, right? On the giving end and the receiving end. And then speaking to multitudes of other tattoo artists around the world and what they've seen and learned from their client relationships, and just kind of demystifying this tattoo part of this world and this world. Have a beautiful day.